Good morning and welcome. This is Cheche, the show where opinion counts, live on Citizen TV. I'm Udwa Kamimo. Now, this has been quite a busy week. Final submissions in the challenge to the presidential results at the Supreme Court have been made, with a ruling expected on Friday. Tomorrow sees the swearing in of the 12th Parliament. And so we often consider the state of our nation, but what is the state of our democracy? Well, today's guest is Alex Awiti. He's the director of the East Africa Institute at the Aga Khan. We're expecting the outgoing MP for Rarieda, Nicholas Gumbo, to join us as well. But you'll see that we also have with us our regular panelists, Mutegi Njau and Charles Oziambo, who are both of Royal Media Services. So good morning and welcome.
Okay. Thank you.
And so first to the
I think you need to say the guy works for the university. You said Aga Khan.
Aga Khan University.
Yes.
I did. Thank you, Mutegi. And so I'll start with our guest. So given the week that we've had, we've seen our institutions and our processes on display. What would you say is the state of our democracy?
I think the state of our democracy is troubled. Oftentimes, as I say, when it gets dark, that's when the stars come out. And that's the moment we are at. Will the stars come out? Will the institutions survive in terms of credibility, the integrity? And in this new constitutional dispensation, with the 6th election since the reinstatement of multi-party democracy in the country, with the second kind of more prominent bout of an election petition, and with all of the things that are happening around the 47 counties that sometimes we don't pay attention to, there's so much movement, and I think there is need for real reflection as we begin to systematically think about whether the institutions we've created are actually fit for purpose. And then the larger question still is, what is that purpose? Is that purpose really to deliver the will of the people? Is that purpose to stitch together this colonial creature which is in a state of turmoil? And will the individuals at the helm of some of the most significant institutions of the country, the presidency, the parliament, can we pull together to give a sense of comfort that we can actually finally deliver Project Kenya?
Gentlemen, panelists, what do you think? Is that an assessment that you'd agree with, Charles?
I look at it a bit differently. First of all, from the myriads of descriptions of what democracy really is. And I look at a situation where I would agree with Alex is this is the point where the institutions and those mandated to ensure that democracy is displayed out there have an opportunity to come to that. A situation where we are going to know whether it's just words for the sake of words, or is it really practical? And even as we do that, we are looking at a situation where we are beginning to set a precedence as a country. Remember, they say democracy is relative. Even in America, people question their democratic levels as much as it's alluded to be the leading democracy in the world. So it's quite an abyss. We are somewhere in the swamp. We are waiting to sprout.
Mutegi?
I don't see it so negatively myself. We have institutions that are supposed to work. Maybe the people in charge of them are not very effective. But I think the main problem we have in this country is trust. We don't trust ourselves. We don't trust our institutions. The people who man them may not be performing their functions effectively. In fact, the only thing I see we are having a problem with is that democracy. People are now asking, are we a country? Can we separate? That's where the danger is. Because some people are dissatisfied, so they say, oh, why can't we set our own...
But isn't that a reflection on this whole idea of Project Kenya? That for at least half the country, Project Kenya is working, and for the other half, Project Kenya does not work.
So in essence, we're actually separated.
Does Project Kenya work or not work because of elections?
Well, You see, this is a really old argument. It's a very old conversation. In 1997, Mwai Kibaki and a bunch of his supporters were disgruntled about the outcome of the 1997 election. And basically, there were conversations around ripping the country apart. This is not the first time. So I think, as Charles said, these things are very relative. It depends on which side of the divide you are. Then it either works or doesn't work for you. And it is because of the way that we have idiotically crafted our politics as a zero-sum game. And sometimes I wonder whether...
Idiotically is rather a stronger word.
It is very strong, because I feel very strongly about the construction and the thoughtful process that should go behind building a nation that is believably cohesive, is believably fair. Democracy is not an abstract thing. It is something that you must touch, feel every single day. Are you included? Is your voice represented? Are your aspirations realizable in the country where you live? Is it basically merit that will get you up? I'm not in that space where I feel the country doesn't work for me. It works for me. But I think there are millions of Kenyans who feel that they don't get a fair shake of the process. And even just one disgruntled voice matters. And I think it is important for all of us to, just like Jesus Christ, you got to leave your 99 sheep and go after that one.
So then how does that
make this thing work for us?
How does that sit with the description of about democracy being about the say of the way of the majority and the say of the minority?
I think in terms of the outcomes that it produces, in terms of who the leader is, that's a very separate thing. But what are the goods that are distributed out of a democratic process? And I think we need to be very careful and separate democracy from the cycles of election, because that's not it. There's much more, as Mutegi alluded, inside the deeper structure. What we're seeing is really a very small part of all of that structure. It is actually a performance. It is an action. Well, of course, the processes that go behind it. But what are the other spaces that enable citizens to feel really included in the process, apart from just the elective process?
We are talking like this because of elections. It's good you have mentioned 1997.
Yes.
But in 2002, Kenya was written as, the Kenyans were written as most of the happiest people.
Because it worked. For the majority, for wherever you however you define the majority.
The Kenyans were described as very happy people.
And very optimistic.
And very optimistic. Fellows who used to go to the streets and arrest policemen, and everybody was
What changed?
You see, that's why I'm saying, is democracy about elections only? Without, once this mess is settled up on Friday, what will
the
we be
Supreme Court petition?
Yes. What will we be talking next week? And will people still be insisting, depends on how it is decided, that now we want to separate, we will go to the street, we want to demonstrate?
Look, if we're talking about processes and institutions and what they mean for our democracy, and you point out that a lot of this scrutiny tends to happen every election cycle. So if we were to look at Parliament first, even before swearing in tomorrow, salaries was an issue. This was a big issue last week. What does that say about the state of the custodians of our democracy?
The problem with this country is that everybody is our time to eat. Whether you are MC, whether you are chief, whether you are the president or the deputy president or the MP or governor, all of them, everybody wants to take. The essence of service, is not there. The devolution devolved corruption and eating, which is good anyway. Because previously what used to happen is that a few people will be so rich and then will invest their money in
but again the question
in abroad. But now money, even if it's corrupt money, at least it's going to the villages and building houses and whatever they are doing.
But again, Mutegi, if you say the essence is service, would you serve if you are dissatisfied? Because if we expect these people to provide service, as far as leadership is concerned, make laws, supervise, and represent, they need to be satisfied.
Satisfied in what way? by them paying themselves? Are you suggesting, therefore, we should allow members of parliament and MCs vote themselves salaries and give themselves trip to Jerusalem?
But they usually do, though, because they oversight the Salaries and Remuneration Commission. They're not here, even though we asked them to join the conversation. They also, legislate. And they have legislated allowances for themselves. They've legislated trips for themselves.
Which is wrong.
This argument of blaming these legislators for apportioning funds to themselves, ever since the public was given a voice in as far as budgetary process is concerned, to me is a fallacy. Because you and I fail to turn up to give our opinion when it comes to the budgeting process. You and I fail to petition as Kenyans, and yet the law allows us to do that. And so I'll go back to what Alex said and insist that we have a democracy, only that we do not want to be democratic ourselves. We do not want to use the rights and the opportunities that we are granted as Kenyans.
But in
Alex, you seem amused.
But see, the reason why I'm amused is that this remuneration conversation around MPs has been here for a very long time. We've gone back and forth. We've tried to kind of create caveats and all these landmines and basically say, well, you can agitate for a pay rise, but you cannot benefit from it in the life of the parliament. Now, what Salas RM did basically was an attempt to rationalize the public service wage. Mr. Kenyatta, throughout his time, in the first time, has basically decried the outsized nature of a public wage bill. He basically said, I think last year, that it is not fair for less than 1% of the country to take away more than 50% of the national GDP, of our gross domestic product. But I think what is inexcusable, what I think borders on just a lack of basic morals, is for MPs, before they're even sworn in, to begin to say that we will not take that 90,000 pay cut that has been suggested. And this wasn't done just for them. Even Uhuru's cabinet, cabinet secretaries will take a pay cut. State officers will take a pay cut. I don't think that it is wrong for MPs to take that pay cut if it is rationalized, if the whole idea is rationalize the wage bill. But I would hesitate to push that argument, because I think that is just penny pinching. That's not where the hemorrhaging happens. The excesses in terms of public spending and kind of the recklessness in the way that we operate as a country is elsewhere. And I think if that's the argument that MPs step forward and say, this will not change the structure of the wage bill, I would support them. But then I would then urge them to go into Kenyatta's budget, as Charles has said, and citizens must be a part of that process, to then say, here's where you must cut. There's a lot of public wastage that goes on in just running these two centers of power, running the county government and running the national government. We need to begin to think very systematically about how do we really contain this rogue called the public wage bill.
Charles?
Just like I said, and Alex agrees with me, it rests with you and I. It rests with the common Mwananchi. We have to step up, because it's a fallacy. On one hand, to argue that we desire and demand democracy. Then again, whatever democracy grants us, we are fast to chide. If we want democracy, we want representation. This wage bill is high because of this bloated representation. This bloated representation is a result of the democracy that we
voted for the Constitution.
And we voted for the Constitution in a democratic
process. Don't you agree that if you have to blame, then blame the public? Because in more of these things, there is something called public participation.
I think that's the point that Charles is making.
Therefore, but is that public participation of any consequence?
Is it informed?
Is it informed? Exactly. Do we have professional, for instance, the Law Society, professional societies of East Africa, and all the doctors and whatever, nothing? Do they take part when it comes to public participation? I have seen the Nairobi county government now want to do some development, and they put an ad in the newspaper yesterday. They are going to have meetings in certain areas, in every constituency, in their planning. Are professional societies and professional people going to take off their from their offices and go and contribute. No. It is unemployed employee who are going to be there, maybe because they want to have a cup of tea, who will be in those meetings.
Or maybe some stipend.
Yeah, exactly. So
some 500 shillings here and there.
But
so that's the problem.
I think the real large question is, can we afford this kind of government? And this is where I get a little disappointed. Former President Mr. Mwai Kibaki is a graduate of London School of Economics. He had a Bachelor of Arts in Economics. He went to London School of Economics. I think he has 2 master's degrees in public finance. He was in charge when this constitution was written. Why didn't anybody ask what this thing would cost? And how much of our life's sweat would go into just carrying this overbearing burden called the 2010 Constitution and all of its provisions in terms of proliferating institutions and creating all these things that we now can afford. If you look at, I really sympathize with Mr. Kenyatta. The recurrent bill is pretty high. If you look at the infrastructure deficit that has to be delivered to rig this economy to compete in the 21st century, you ask yourself...
And to attain Vision 2030.
Absolutely. He has to kill this country with debt for this thing to work. So be prepared for more debt.
Which is already...
Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And productivity is low. We are not the most productive place on the planet.
Look, Udwak, we are in a situation... I was watching a news clip, quite historical, I think 1962, when Kenya was just at the dawn of independence. And the reporter asked, was interviewing people in the streets, and one white man stood out and said, if Africans are ready to embrace leadership and do things that will change their lives, then give them independence now. But if they are not ready, then we have to stay on a little longer. Fast forward to 2010. We asked and agitated after almost 2 decades for a new constitution, one that would give us freedom, one that would let us exercise our abilities and rights. Then the question that begs is, were we really ready?
What were Africans doing before the colonialists came?
They were living,
yeah,
satisfied. It's called the average life.
It's called the...
average begets average.
Average begets...
You wake up, you go to the shamba, you go back home, you eat, you sleep, you wake up, you storytell, and life goes on. They were never thinking about building railway lines. They were never having a Vision 2030, were they? But here we are today, Vision 2030. We expect the government to steer us towards that. We have a democratic process, bloated representation and all, and an ability to be able to participate in the budgetary process, but are we embracing it?
Charles, I think your argument, particularly when you refer to the colonialists, is a tenuous one, because it suggests that that Africans really are not ready to...
It was really not my argument. Like I said, and I quoted, paraphrased a white man who was asked in the streets, do you think Kenya should get independence now? And he said, for as long as the Africans are ready to govern themselves, yes. But if they are not, then we have to think twice.
But Udwak, let me throw something in here that complicates this situation. Boletsi Mbeki, Thabo Mbeki's brother, famously asked, what are these Africans about? The white people build schools, they put medicines in hospitals. So he was basically decrying the rot and dysfunction of post-colonial Africa. And you know, it is a very dicey space to go. But it goes back to Charles' question. Were Africans ready to run their affairs? Right now, we can't complain. The white man's been gone for a really long time. He left problematic institutions. He left some landmines that we should, by all means, navigate very carefully. But he can't be blamed for everything that is going on here now.
Yeah, because remember, it was illiteracy, disease, and what? And poverty.
Yeah, and poverty.
How many Kenyans live below the poverty line today, 54 years after independence? 7 years after we promulgated a constitution that we take pride in.
But to me,
Mutegi,
we have challenges, but I cannot state that we are worse off than 63.
when we got our independence.
When we got our... The poverty of that time...
That's not the... We're not saying they were worse off.
We are not...
We're just saying... I was just giving that example to say, in some cases, well, I guess the population has grown, and there are many challenges about...
Are there some countries in Africa... Are there not some countries in Africa which are doing very well, like Rwanda, for instance? Or maybe what we might say is we have excessive democracy. That in maybe those Asian countries where Mahathir, for instance, where there are no democracy, they developed. Maybe what we need to do is check this presidential which you are saying is excessive, and maybe lessen. But I don't think we are worse off. When you go to the car park here outside Citizen, if I compare when I was a reporter with the Nation in 1980, how many reporters used to drive? Or maybe one, two. When I go to the parking here, how many reporters? Almost everybody drives a car. To me, that's positive.
Actually, it's not that we are worse off. No. The reason why I gave that analogy, and I said fast forward to 2010, Kenyans have agitated for a new constitution, one that they take pride in, and say this is now the key to our democracy. And remember, the theme of our talk is the state of democracy. And so we ask ourselves, if in 54 years ago we wanted to fight illiteracy, poverty, and disease, where are we now? Look at the statistics. We still have, although the government has been struggling to bring these figures down, but we still have numbers of people dying.
Look, I'm hearing several things from the panel. One, that citizens have refused, citizens and professional citizens at that, have shied away from taking responsibility for public participation. Mutegi, you're defining better off in material terms, but you'll recall last week when we had the civil society activist John Jamue, who talked about President Kibaki's time and the development that came with it, and not preventing the 2007-2008 post-election violence. So we'll come back to this issue because we've got to take a break now. This is Cheche, and we're live on Citizen TV. Our SMS number is 22422, and you can reach us on Twitter using the hashtag Cheche. Excuse me. The question we're asking today is, what is the state of Kenya's democracy?